Good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Broom, and the title of my presentation today is Swimming Increases Post-Exercise Energy Intake. And this was a study that was undertaken whilst I was at Sheffield Hallam in collaboration with Loughborough University. What I'd like to do initially, though, is just to introduce to you SHARE. So SHARE is Sheffield Hallam Appetite Research Cluster. And I was the convener and leader of the steering group that includes Steve and Caroline, who will be presenting after myself. So obviously this, if you like, is a bit of a SHARE symposium to showcase some of the work that's been undertaken at SHU. So just briefly then, this was a CKIP, a Creating Knowledge Implementation Plan funded cluster. And we did this because after a bit of a kind of a people and skills analysis, looking at various different profiles throughout the various, what was faculties then, we identified around about 30 academics who had an interest in appetite related research. So we got a small pot of money. I think it was last May, June time last year. We brought these people together. We had a launch event where we got 3 eminent keynote speakers to present on the topic, and SHARE was effectively formed. So our work fits into 3 themes: the biology and physiology of eating, hedonics, foods and feeding, eating behaviors, traits and states. And we have a blog site. You can see the web link there. Please feel free, if you're interested, sign up to our blog site, sign up for the alerts. In terms of the academics, as part of SHARE, we've all undertaken PhD supervision, and our areas of expertise are there if people would like to self-fund PhDs. And of course, we're undertaking research and consultancy. And, you know, even in the last few weeks, we've been working with a number of industry partners to try and, you know, bring some consultancy work to SHU. So what we can offer, I'm not going to go through all of these, but obviously just to give you a bit of an idea, down at the business school in the food sciences team, we can obviously offer food product development. With regards to the biosciences, we can measure gut peptide hormones, and, you know, with the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre, we can measure physical activity, sleep, and various other health markers. So that was just a bit of an introduction to SHARE for you. So in terms of providing a little bit of context for my talk and my study and why this area is important, exercise continues to get bad press and misrepresentation in the media with regards to weight loss. Now, if you just do a simple search into Google, will exercise make me fat? You get in less than 1 second about 11,800,000 hits. Now, the top hit from that quality broadsheet that is the Daily Mail: how exercise can make you pile on the pounds. Are you keeping fit but still not getting any slimmer? And this was based on a study that was published by one of the world leaders in the field, John Blundell, completely taking the findings out of context. And we do have other examples. Health warning: exercise makes you fat. Why exercise can make you fat. Some sort of irony if you look at the visual there of the very highly toned, slim female. But anyway, you know, without wanting to rant or digress too much, in my opinion, poor misrepresentation in the media is becoming a public health problem, especially considering the thousands of people that are going to read these newspaper articles, compared to the, you know, handful of people that are probably going to read my journal articles. So it's really, really important that we get the impact stuff right, and obviously try and showcase, you know, good science and sound science. So an introduction to the study then. So single bouts of land-based exercise, for example, running, cycling, and resistance exercise, suppress appetite during and for a short period after. And I've done the very egotistical thing there of just presenting a selection of my papers that have demonstrated that. Now, also land-based exercise and breaking up sedentary behavior just with walking, does not typically alter post-exercise energy intake on the day of exercise. So that's to dispel a couple of myths, really, that, you know, exercise does not necessarily make you more hungry, and it doesn't necessarily lead to an increased energy intake at the next meal. However, participants in the trials that we've undertaken have suggested that swimming may increase appetite and may increase energy intake at the next meal, which quite frankly is agreeable based on my own personal experience. So again, I just want you to actually just think and reflect now, you know, when you go swimming, you know, does it make you ravenous, you know, during or after swimming? So effectively, that was our primary aim, and we wanted to test this. So the aim of our study was to directly compare the acute effects of exertion-matched swimming and cycling on appetite and energy intake in men and women. As a secondary exploratory aim, we sought to determine the modulating effect of sex on key study outcomes. So was there any difference in these responses between males and females? Based on some preliminary data that we'd seen in the literature, the anecdotal evidence as well, our primary hypothesis was that swimming, but not cycling, would increase appetite and ad libitum energy intake. So ad libitum, that's Latin for as much as you would like, all right? It's not an Italian pasta that somebody thought it was at one of the conferences I presented at a few years ago. In terms of the participant characteristics then, so the males and females in our study were habitually active and they could cycle and swim at a recreational level, okay? They weren't elite, and that is important. All of the females in the study had regular menstrual cycles, they weren't pregnant, and nobody had a medical condition or was taking any medication known to affect metabolism. If you eyeball the table, okay, in terms of the sample size, we had 32 participants complete our study. That's quite a large sample for this type of work, considering it's a randomized repeated measures crossover design. And we had a good split of males and females, 17 and 15 respectively. Quite a young adult population, overall mean age of 23 years. Body mass index, just slightly healthy weight, you know, close to overweight for the overall sample. And as would be expected, body mass higher in males than females, body fat percentage higher in females. We also got our participants to complete something called the 3-factor eating questionnaire. This is really, really important in terms of our type of research. That's to identify if anybody's a restrained eater. Okay, if people exert high restrained eating scores, that means they're constantly thinking about dieting. They won't eat a lot of food. So effectively what we're doing in this type of study, when we're presenting a feeding challenge, an ad libitum meal in this case, restrained eaters wouldn't eat a lot of that food, so you have to exclude them. But you can clearly see there that actually those values of 9 and 8, our sample weren't restrained eaters. So let's have a bit of a look at the protocol and the associated methods, and I've tried to provide a kind of a visual diagram of this. So we provided every single participant with a standardized breakfast, and that breakfast consisted of a croissant, strawberry jam, and orange juice, and they consumed that at home. They arrived at the lab indicated by the downward arrow, undertaking limiting their physical activity. And then at baseline at 0, we got all participants to complete, if you look at the bottom, a visual analog scale. So visual analog scales, they're 100 millimeters in length. They ask various questions to ascertain the participants' hunger, fullness, satisfaction, as well as prospective food consumption. And we use those VASs to measure appetite at regular intervals throughout the trial. So at baseline, for 60 minutes, participants either swam, cycled, or rested in an hour time period. And the swimming trial and the cycling trial were exertion matched. We got people to work at 15 on the RPE scale, which is described as hard. At 1.5 hours for 30 minutes, the participants had access to a pasta meal, okay, pasta and tomato sauce, and they were told to eat until comfortably full and satisfied. Now, the reason I've put 2 pictures of food here is quite important, because what I've done here is I've provided you with a food cue. Now, actually, if you like croissants and you like pasta, and it's getting close to dinner time now, that might actually make you hungry. So it's actually vitally important that in all these types of studies, we make sure we remove all of the other food cues. So participants throughout the trials weren't allowed to have access to their mobile phone or read magazines or watch television. Now let's get into some of the findings then, and the appetite findings in this case. And I'm just highlighting 2 of what I think are the most key findings. So appetite, yes, appetite is hunger, fullness, satisfaction, and prospective food consumption, but I'm only presenting the PFC data here. Again, if you just eyeball the figure, on the x-axis you have the time in hours, on the y-axis you have the delta, that's the change from baseline, PFC in millimeters. You can see at time point 0 that the baseline hunger was not significantly different between the control trial, which is depicted by the closed square, the cycling trial that's depicted by the grey circle, or the swimming trial that's depicted by the open triangle. And in terms of the response, we had a main effective trial here. So if you just look at the triangles and follow the graph up, you can see that there is a significantly increased prospective food consumption in the swimming trial compared to the cycling trial, more so in the control trial. So this means that the appetite during the swimming trial was greater, and this is also confirmed by error under the curve analysis. So that's obviously subjective appetite, but when actually we look at the amount of pasta that was eaten at the ad libitum meal 30 minutes after either the exercise bout or the control bout. So on the x-axis, you have the trial, you have control on the left-hand side, cycling in the middle, swimming on the right-hand side, and absolute energy intake on the y-axis. If you focus on the swimming trial initially, if you just have a look at the horizontal line in the middle in terms of the mean response, then just glance over to the far left, which is the control. This difference here, which is around about 500 kilojoules, did reach significance. So there was a significant increase in the absolute energy intake at the ad libitum pasta meal in the swimming trial compared to the control trial. No significant difference between the control and the cycling trial, and the difference between the cycling and the swimming trial didn't reach significance either. Interestingly, we've mapped out the individual response, and as with most of our studies, you can see quite wide variation in terms of the amount that people eat after exercise. So in conclusion then, a single bout of moderate intensity swimming increased ad libitum energy intake in a sample of recreationally active men and women. This effect was greater than that observed in an exertion-matched cycling trial, which highlights an orexigenic or appetite-stimulating effect of swimming. This should be considered when prescribing exercise as part of weight management. There is 2 studies, one in the late 80s and one in the late 90s, that has shown that swimming interventions provoke less weight loss than other interventions. So this is something that definitely needs to be followed up. Additionally, studies also need to characterize the longer-term influence of swimming, as well as define the acute orexigenic mechanisms, because we haven't measured, this wasn't a mechanistic study. We're not sure why this is happening. So what I'm going to try and do here is just be a little bit speculative excuse me. And this slide here just demonstrates how complicated the control of appetite is. And, you know, within the short space of time that I've got remaining, there's no way I'm going to be able to explain this figure to you. But, you know, the control of appetite is very difficult. You know, actually, if we just focus on the right-hand side here, you've got gut peptide hormones like ghrelin, CCK, and PYY that I've measured in my work. But this doesn't even include the hedonic response or reward pathway. So I'll give you a classic example of this. So when you've had your Christmas dinner, you've had your turkey and all the trimmings, you're absolutely full. Ghrelin levels are suppressed. PYY is at its peak. But then someone says, are we going to have some Christmas pudding? All right. You're going to eat Christmas pudding because you've not had it for a year. All right. And you might not get that chance again. So it is very complex. I've added the thermometers in the middle near the energy balance, if you just have a look at that, because it's, you know, certainly with regards to the swimming here, swimming is not undertaken in a thermoneutral environment. So I think there's something going on in terms of losing metabolic heat to in the water, which is potentially driving up the hunger, which definitely needs further investigation. So for those of you that are interested, we did publish a really nice comprehensive review a couple of years ago in appetite, on appetite in the journal Nutrients. So do have a look if you're interested. I'd like to acknowledge my collaborators who I've worked with throughout SHU. That's Professor David Stencil from Loughborough, who was my PhD supervisor, Masashi Miyashita from Japan, Alice Thackeray and James King, who are at Loughborough, James Dorling, who's at Penn State, and Dan Bailey, who's recently moved to Brunel University. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. Any references are available on request, and my email address is at the bottom there. I am pleased to say as well that in fact yesterday, the paper has been accepted for publication in the journal Appetite, so it should be available soon, and will definitely be contributing to SHU's ref submission. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thanks very much for that, Dave. It's very interesting talk this afternoon. Can I open up to the floor for questions for Dave, please?
Last one. Dave, thanks for that. Dave, really interesting. I'm interested to know, Dave, what about habit formation? You know, where does that sit in here in terms of, you know, the nudge and all the stuff we're looking at in behavioural insights? You know, what about breaking habits and creating positive habits in terms of food and diet intake?
So if I'm going to look at the let's take this swimming study in particular, and one of the things I mentioned earlier that we did this study in recreational, well, not athletes, but the general public. Studies that have looked at swimming in particular in the past have used elite athletes who have actually formed their own habits and are actually quite accustomed to the response, the swimming response to energy intake. So there's a clear difference there in terms of the habits between elite athletes and the general population, which is potentially why we've seen an increase in absolute energy intake in the general population compared to previously, why we haven't seen anything in elite athletes.
Thanks for that. Okay. Any other questions from the floor? I was just interested to know with the first data point, looking at the post exercise. I was just interested why with the control group and the cyclists were the same, why you had an immediate response with the swimming. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that one particular data point.
Yeah, I mean, actually, if I was going to be a little bit critical of the work, and actually a bit of a massive oversight, is that we actually just measured appetite before and after the exercise. We actually didn't capture, we didn't complete a visual analog scale during the exercise. So actually, whilst you kind of see what effectively looks like an increased appetite response in the cycling, based on all the previous research and even my research, you know, we would probably see a suppression of appetite in the cycling. So that is definitely one of the limitations of the study.
Good stuff. Thanks for that. Okay. Any more questions from the floor? Apologies if I can't see any hands. I'll just check the participant list quickly. Okay, great stuff. Thanks so much for that, Dave. Really interesting talk this afternoon.